Hi, I'm Lily. And for most of my life, I wasn't living my story. I was playing a role she wrote for me. It wasn't until she said, "You're nothing without me," that I realized I had to choose, obey, or reclaim myself. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about something harder, healing without her permission. Have you ever had to break free from someone who said they loved you, but only on their terms? Tell me in the comments what moment finally made you say, enough. That evening in April 2017, the air still held a hint of winter, though the tulips outside had begun their hesitant bloom. I stood in the marble-tiled foyer of the Hartford Club, wearing a navy blue sheath dress my mother had picked out 2 days prior. "It brings out the seriousness in your cheekbones," she'd said, whatever that meant. I smiled on cue, shook hands with men who smelled like leather and cologne, and nodded through conversations about things I barely understood: supply chains, mergers, someone's fourth startup. Another networking event. Another room full of people who knew Margaret Whitmore but barely glanced at me. "Lily," she'd say as she introduced me. "Just graduated from Princeton. She's poised to take on the family legacy." The words always came with a gleam in her eye, like she was offering a rare wine. I was the label, the vintage she had curated for over 2 decades. "Any plans post-grad?" one investor asked, sipping from a sweating tumbler. "I'm exploring options," I replied. He smiled thinly. "You're in good hands." That's what they all said. "You're in good hands," like I was some fragile investment being passed from one portfolio to another. The ride home was quiet, save for the low hum of tires against pavement. My mother drove like she did everything else, smooth, calculated, a little too fast. I watched her from the passenger seat, her profile sharp under the dashboard lights. She was beautiful in the way city buildings are, intimidating, polished, all corners and no warmth. "Mom," I said, voice barely above the music, "I've been thinking." "That's a dangerous habit," she murmured, eyes on the road. I took a breath. I want to start something on my own, a wellness studio, something that merges creativity, mindfulness, maybe even art therapy. I've been sketching ideas for months. She blinked. "Lily, that's not a business. That's a hobby. It could be more, if you'd just let me." "No." Her voice cut like glass. "You're not throwing away your education to chase incense and watercolors. We've invested too much in your future." We. As if my life was a co-owned project. Back home, the scent of eucalyptus candles greeted me before I opened the front door. Everything inside was still and spotless. Not a single cushion out of place, not a single surface left unpolished. The kind of home people walked through with their hands clasped behind their backs. Even the flowers on the table, lilies today, stood perfectly arranged, their stems trimmed at a 45-degree angle. I climbed the stairs to my old bedroom. It hadn't changed in years. The walls still wore the muted sage paint she chose during my sophomore year. Shelves lined with achievement plaques and curated souvenirs from summer programs I barely remembered. It felt like stepping into a museum exhibit. The promising daughter. I slipped off my heels and sat on the edge of the bed. My reflection in the vanity mirror looked hollow, like I had been living someone else's life on autopilot. Who was this girl? Who smiled when told, nodded when expected? Who hadn't made a single real decision in years? A cold knot tightened in my chest. I reached under the bed and pulled out the old tin box. Still there, covered in a fine layer of dust, like even the air in this house disapproved of who I used to be. Inside, wrapped in faded tissue paper, was my sketchbook, the one I used to fill with watercolors and charcoal drawings before Mom called it wasted time. I flipped it open. Pages bloomed to life. A girl standing in a rainstorm with her arms open. A tea shop with soft lighting and crooked tables. A mandala made entirely of abstract faces. Each drawing felt like a whisper from a forgotten self. I turned another page and found one I'd taped in from a school notebook. My own handwriting in jagged script. "Remember this. You are not a reflection. You are a person." I must have written it the day she made me erase a self-portrait because it looked too melancholic. The past stirred like wind in old curtains. I traced the lines of a sketch. A woman with one hand reaching forward, the other behind her, holding a child's hand. My throat tightened. This is who I was before I learned to disappear in plain sight. A knock startled me. Sharp. Rhythmic. My mother. I snapped the book shut and shoved it beneath a pillow. "I'll be down in a minute," I called, trying to steady my voice. No response. Just the fading sound of her heels clicking down the hallway. I stared at the door, at the tiny tremor in my hands. "I have to remember who I was," I whispered, not just to fill the silence, but to promise myself something. Something small but sacred. Because if I didn't start now, when? The scent of lilies drifted in from the hallway, heady and cloying. But tonight, for the first time in years, I didn't let it drown me. I knelt beside the bed and slid out a shoebox. Inside, business plan drafts, logo sketches, even a mood board clipped together with paper clips. I hid them again, sealing the box with a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Downstairs, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it. "Margaret, where have you been all afternoon?" I stared at the screen, hesitated, then typed. "Just catching up with an old friend." I say 3 dots appeared, then it disappeared. 3 more dots, then nothing. Later that evening, at dinner, the silence stretched like a wire between us. She served roasted chicken and asparagus. Classic Margaret. Efficient, elegant, cold. "You've been going out a lot lately," she said, cutting her food with precision. "I'm just reconnecting," I replied, eyes on my plate. "With whom?" "Old classmates, just catching up." She didn't speak, but I felt her eyes, sharp and searching. Silence. That was her signature. Words were optional when judgment could fill the space instead. That night, after she went to bed, I booted up my laptop. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of the screen. I registered the domain, rootandritual.com. My hands trembled slightly as I typed, as if each keystroke tugged at one of her invisible strings. Then I opened a blank document and began outlining my first product, a curated self-care kit designed for women like me, who had spent too long pretending they were fine. For the first time in a long time, something felt mine. Just as I finished sketching the packaging mock-up, my phone buzzed again. Margaret. "I hope you're not wasting time again." I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. She hadn't said anything out loud earlier, but somehow she always knew when I was slipping out of the box she had built for me. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my inbox. From Marcus. Subject, intro opportunity. "An investor friend of mine is intrigued. He wants to meet next week. Are you ready?" Am I ready? I didn't know, but I wanted to be. For once, I wanted to show up not as Margaret's daughter, not as someone else's reflection, but as myself. I closed my laptop slowly, my heart pounding not from fear, but from the flicker of something new. Hope. And I clung to that hope like a secret flame, hidden beneath the shoebox under my bed. You don't realize you're trapped until you try to leave, and the exit is nowhere to be found. I sat near the fogged-up window of a Hartford cafe, steam rising from my untouched cappuccino. Outside, leaves were just beginning to turn, the green bleeding slowly into yellow along the edges. Inside, the cafe hummed with quiet energy, students tapping on laptops, baristas calling names, the scent of cinnamon and dark roast clinging to the air. Marcus slid into the seat across from me. He looked almost exactly the same as in college. Worn leather messenger bag, dark curls a little longer than before, and a calmness that seemed immune to whatever chaos the world spun around him. "I thought you said you weren't a coffee person," I said. "I'm not," he grinned. "But for this conversation, I figured I'd make an exception." I handed him my notebook, flipping to a page filled with scribbles, arrows, and nervous ambition. He read silently, then leaned back. "A lifestyle brand based on healing and intentional living," he said. "Wellness without the fake positivity. I like it." I swallowed. "You do? It's fresh and real. But you know this already. You didn't ask me here just for validation." I gave a small laugh, eyes dropping to my lap. "I asked because I have no idea what I'm doing," he nodded. "Then we'll figure it out. But Lily..." His voice softened. "If you want to build something real, you'll have to do it without her." I knew exactly who he meant. My smile faded. "I know." He tapped the notebook gently. "You've got something worth chasing here. Just make sure you're the one holding the pen." The walk home felt longer than usual. Every house on our street looked identical. white fencing, trimmed hedges, that same cold perfection my mother insisted was classic suburban elegance. I slipped through the front door quietly, as if afraid my ambition might echo against the walls. Margaret wasn't in the foyer, but her presence loomed like it always did. I climbed the stairs, heart thudding, and opened my bedroom door. My room still looked like it belonged to a 17-year-old who won a scholarship for obedience. Framed certificates, a single bookshelf of approved reading, curtains always drawn back perfectly. "You're nothing without me," she said, and for a terrifying second, I believed her. The words lingered long after the candles had burned low on the Christmas dinner table. I sat among family, plates scraped clean, wine glasses half full, but the warmth in the room didn't touch me. It hadn't for years. My mother's voice had a way of dulling every bright thing, like a fog that only I seemed to notice. The roast beef had been overcooked, but no one dared say so. Margaret had been glowing with pride, not about the food, of course, but her latest promotion. "Vice President of Strategic Growth," she announced, raising her glass like a toast to herself. "It's not for the faint of heart. Some people," she let her gaze pause on me just a second too long, "simply don't understand what real ambition requires." I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. Aunt Denise chuckled politely. Uncle Frank made a joke about office politics that no one really heard. My cousin Elliot, seated across the table, met my eyes. There was something in his expression, concern, maybe, or recognition, that made me look down at my plate. After dessert, I found myself alone in the hallway, pretending to check messages. Elliot appeared beside me, voice low. "You look like you're about to explode," he said gently. "You okay?" I nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just tired." He didn't press. He never did, but his silence felt like the only honest thing in that house. Later that night, I escaped to my childhood bedroom, the one my mother insisted on preserving exactly as it was, as though freezing me in time would keep me from growing beyond her reach. The familiar scent of lavender linen spray made me uneasy. Everything was just as she wanted, except for one thing. My locked drawer was ajar. The papers inside, product sketches, early branding notes, bits of my secret life, had been disturbed. Not taken, not destroyed, just moved. My heart pounded as I rifled through the stack. Nothing was missing. But the placement had changed, just enough to let me know she had looked. Just enough to make me feel exposed. I clenched the folder and sat on the edge of my bed, willing myself not to cry. Then came the knock. One soft tap, then another. Margaret didn't wait for an answer. She walked in wearing her silk robe, perfectly composed. "You left your charger downstairs," she said smoothly, setting it on the nightstand. I didn't respond. Her eyes flicked to the papers in my lap, then back to my face. She smiled. "Don't waste your breath, sweetheart. I already know everything." I couldn't sleep that night. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't soothe, it suffocates. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the glow from the hallway nightlight leaking under my door like an unwanted presence. My mind replayed her words on loop. "Don't waste your breath, sweetheart. I already know everything." She had said it with a smile, like she wasn't just asserting power, but savoring it. I got up and checked the drawer again, pulled out the sketch pad, flipped through every page like they might have been altered. They hadn't. But the mere knowledge that she'd seen them, that she'd dared open something so private, made my hands shake. I felt invaded, as if my inner world was no longer mine. I wrapped myself in an old cardigan and paced the room. The air was dry, tinged with pine from the living room wreath. From the window, I could see the street covered in snow. Peaceful, blanketed, silent. It was a lie. Nothing about this place was peaceful. Margaret's house had always been a museum, impeccably arranged, sterile. No place for mess or noise or dreams that didn't belong to her. When my phone buzzed again, I jumped. It was Marcus. "Investor is flying in. He'll be at the Hartford Marriott on the 3rd. You in?" It took me a full minute to type out a reply. "Yes." Then, as if responding to that tiny flicker of bravery, I found myself clearing a corner of the desk. I laid out the sketchbook, product notes, even the rough logo I'd scribbled months ago. A willow tree bending, but not breaking. That's what I felt like. Bent, not broken. I pulled out the candle Margaret had given me last Christmas. Bergamot and vetiver. ridiculously overpriced. She said it matched my mood. I lit it anyway. The flame danced. I watched it until my eyes stung. It felt like I was witnessing my own resurrection. In the mirror, I looked different. Not stronger, maybe, but clearer. Like something had shifted behind my eyes. I whispered the words Marcus once told me, like a mantra. You get one shot to build something real. Suddenly, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I blew out the candle and shoved everything into the closet. My heart pounded as the door creaked open. But it wasn't her. It was Elliot. Sorry, he said softly. I saw your light. Thought you might need a glass of this. He held up a mug, hot cocoa, with those ridiculous mini marshmallows floating on top. Thanks, I whispered, taking it. Thanks, I whispered, taking it. He looked around the room, at the closed closet, the half-burnt candle. You okay? No, I said, but I will be. He nodded. She doesn't get to own you, you know. The words clung to me long after he left. Maybe he didn't know the whole story, but he knew enough. And for the first time in years, I let someone else see the crack in the shell, and didn't try to cover it. That night, I fell asleep with the sketchpad beside me, a sticky note across the cover that simply read, "Don't give her the ending she wants." The blueprint she gave me wasn't my future. It was my cage. I realized that the more I tried to color inside her lines, the more I erased parts of myself. And here I was now, 3 years into hiding sketches behind false folders, and dreams beneath politeness, about to launch a business I wasn't even sure I was allowed to believe in. Marcus was already waiting when I arrived at the co-working space in Brooklyn. He had taken the seat closest to the window, where soft spring sunlight made the leaves of the potted ferns look like they were glowing. The space buzzed gently with the hum of espresso machines and keyboards tapping. I always loved how alive it felt, so unlike the vacuum-sealed silence of home. You ready? He asked, closing his laptop with a firm but gentle motion. His tone was neutral, but I could feel the weight of it. Today mattered. I sat down across from him and opened my iPad. Define ready, I joked weakly. He smiled. Nervous is normal. This is your first real pitch. I inhaled. My breath felt tight against my ribs. It's more than that. It's the first time something is mine. We ran through the pitch twice, then a third time. The first round, my voice trembled. Second, I stumbled over my own mission statement. But by the third, something shifted. I stopped trying to sound like someone who knew everything. I started sounding like someone who cared deeply. And that, apparently, was enough. Because 2 hours later, I was standing in front of Amira Patel, an early-stage investor known for spotting what she called soul-led startups. She was dressed in clean lines, black slacks and a teal blouse, but her vibe was anything but rigid. She listened with stillness, which was far more intimidating than interruptions. I've seen lifestyle brands before, she said after my presentation, fingers steepled under her chin. But not one that leads with vulnerability. It's risky. I nodded. It's real, I replied. That's the point. A long pause. She tilted her head. You've done your homework. There's a voice here. And a market. I'm willing to test a partnership. Small-scale, trial basis. I barely kept my composure. Thank you, I breathed, trying not to look at Marcus, who sat to my left, subtly nodding with the satisfaction of a mentor seeing their pupil take flight. Back at the apartment, hours later, I hovered over the Publish button on my website. The final prototype images were loaded, the product copy revised, the branding consistent and clean. My story was up there. My real story, told through textures and tone and the soft defiance of a woman reclaiming space. My cursor pulsed. I thought of Mom's voice in my head. Do what I say, or fail. And then I thought of the other voice, quieter but stronger. Mine. Click. The page refreshed. Live. I stared. A notification popped up. One order, then another, and another. People weren't just clicking. They were buying. They saw what I had made and said yes. Not to her version of me. To mine. Marcus texted, Congrats. You did it. I sat in the glow of the screen, my laptop warm against my thighs, a cup of lukewarm tea on the desk beside me, untouched. I let myself smile. Not the tight, camera-ready smile Mom drilled into me. A real one, the kind that cracked a little at the edges because it came from deep within. Then the email appeared. Subject: Urgent. Margaret Holloway, claim of intellectual property violation. I didn't even have to open it to know what it was. My mother's name on the sender line was enough to make my spine stiffen. My thumb hovered over the mouse. The screen blurred for a second before I blinked it away. She knew, she had found it, or someone had told her. Or maybe she had been watching me this whole time, like always, waiting for the moment I dared to step outside her shadow. I clicked. There it was. A formal complaint. Legal language laced with accusation, design infringement, brand confusion, breach of family-owned concepts. She had weaponized the language of control again, this time through intellectual property law. Classic Margaret. If she couldn't stop me with shame or silence, she'd try legality. My breath grew shallow. The light outside had dimmed, the room felt colder. But then I glanced at the dashboard again. 12 orders. A comment on the blog. This is exactly what I've been looking for. Thank you for creating something that feels honest. The comment wrapped around me like a shield. I wasn't invisible anymore. And more importantly, I wasn't alone. I forwarded the complaint to Marcus with a single line. She's trying to shut it down. Thoughts? He replied almost immediately. Don't panic. This is scare strategy. We'll talk to Amira's legal. You stay focused. I wanted to cry, I wanted to scream. But instead, I closed the laptop softly, like sealing a door behind me. I stood up, stretched, and opened the window to let the air in. Across the street, a woman was walking her dog. Someone else was unloading groceries from a Prius. Life kept moving. The world didn't stop because Margaret threatened me. And neither would I. I whispered into the fading light, let her file her claims. Because for the first time, I had one too. I claimed my story. I claimed myself. And I wasn't giving it back. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in bed watching the faint glow of streetlights paint slow-moving shadows on my ceiling. My heart didn't race, but it didn't calm either. It thudded in a steady rhythm that felt like defiance. My fingers twitched with every buzz of my phone, half expecting another blow, another warning from Margaret or someone in her circle. But the only buzz that came was from Shopify. Another sale. At some point, I rose and lit a candle, not because I believed in rituals, but because I wanted the light to be mine. I brewed chamomile tea. I flipped through my sketchbook, not the one hidden for years, but the new one, the one I started 2 weeks ago in the coffee shop with peeling walls and mismatched chairs, the one I allowed to hold new beginnings. And then I wrote something in the margins. This is not rebellion. This is recovery. The line stayed with me. By morning, I knew that no email, no lawsuit threat, no angry phone call could undo what had already been done. The site was live. My voice had left my head and entered the world. And somewhere out there, people were listening. It was only the beginning. You're nothing without me, she said. And for a terrifying second, I believed her. The words didn't come with raised voices or shattered plates. No, Margaret's cruelty was always smooth-edged, like glass, cutting without warning, bleeding you before you even felt the sting. It was Christmas Eve, 2019, and everything smelled like cinnamon and false promises. The house was dressed like a catalog, wreaths on every door, a centerpiece of candles and holly on the dining table, and music softly playing something jazzy and inoffensive in the background. But underneath the glow, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest. The kind I used to ignore, assuming it was nerves. Now I knew better. It was her. Dinner began in the usual stiff rhythm. My Uncle Frank cracked a joke about airline peanuts. Aunt Denise tittered politely. Margaret, across from me in her signature wine-colored blouse, smiled as if nothing could touch her. She lifted her wine glass and offered a toast to a year of bold leadership and rising stock prices, her eyes scanning the room but stopping for half a beat too long on me. Some people, she added casually, don't understand real ambition, but that's okay. Some of us are made to lead. I didn't respond. I chewed a piece of roast beef that tasted like cardboard and pretended not to notice Elliot's glance from the end of the table. My older cousin had always been the silent observer, the type who watched, absorbed, but rarely commented. Tonight, however, he didn't look away. After dinner, I stepped out into the hallway, trying to catch a breath away from the curated perfection. Elliot followed. You look like you're about to explode, he said quietly, his voice pitched low enough not to travel. You okay? I wanted to say yes, wanted to smile, wave it off. But the truth pressed too heavily against my ribs. Sometimes, I said, it feels like I'm a guest in my own life, like I'm renting space inside someone else's story. He nodded slowly. She's intense. That was an understatement, but I appreciated the attempt. She's careful too, I added. Always watching, always one step ahead. She doesn't shout, she strategizes. Elliot didn't say anything, just placed a hand briefly on my shoulder and walked away. I appreciated that too. Later that night, back in my childhood bedroom, which still smelled faintly of lemon polish and restraint, I reached for the locked drawer in my desk, the one where I had hidden the prototype sketches, the fabric swatches, the notes from Marcus. Something felt wrong the second I touched the handle. The lock clicked open too easily. Inside, everything looked almost the same. But almost was the key word. One sketch, my mock-up for the scent line, was upside down. A sticky note I'd placed on the margins was now missing. My heart thudded in my throat. She'd been in here. I stared at the drawer for a full minute, breathing through clenched teeth. And then I heard it, the gentle knock on my door, like clockwork. Margaret didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped in with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sleep well?" she asked, though it was barely past 9. "Working on it," I replied flatly. She glanced at my desk, too casually. "Don't stay up too late drawing, sweetheart. Wouldn't want to distract yourself with silly hobbies." I bit my tongue, fighting the urge to snap. "They're not just drawings." She tilted her head, that trademark look of amused disapproval painted across her face. "Of course they are. You've always been imaginative. But imagination doesn't pay the bills, does it?" I felt the walls shrink around me, inch by inch. "You know what I think?" she said, stepping closer. "I think you're trying to prove something. But you don't have to, Lily. You don't need to be anything more than what I've made you. I built your world. I cleared your path. Everything you are, you owe to me." And then came the words. "You're nothing without me." She said it like a fact, like she was reminding me of the weather forecast. And for a second, just a second, I almost agreed, because part of me had never known anything else. She had been the architect of my every achievement, every plan, every safe little box I had lived in. But the other part of me, the part that remembered what it felt like to draw, to dream, to want something real, clenched its fists inside my chest. Margaret left with a satisfied nod, as if her speech had somehow resolved everything. Once alone, I turned to my desk and opened my laptop. I stared at the email from Marcus, still unread until now. "Investor is flying in. This is your shot. Don't back down." I read it 3 times, then a 4th. In the quiet that followed, I found myself whispering, "I'm not nothing. Not anymore." She may have built the walls, but I had started to carve the doors. And soon, I was going to walk through them. Alone, maybe scared, but on my own terms. The cage she'd spent years crafting was cracking, and I was ready to slip through. Freedom didn't come with fireworks. It came with a quiet I'd never known before. The snow drifted gently across the Hudson Valley, coating the trees in a soft hush. Inside my studio, the wood stove crackled. I moved slowly now, intentionally. No rush, no voice pressing me to be more. River was already sketching at the table, her eyes focused, her hands sure. At 15, she reminded me of who I might have been, before Margaret. That morning, I spoke to her about design as storytelling, not just aesthetics. She listened closely, then surprised me. "Did your mom ever say sorry?" I paused. "No," I said, but I stopped needing her to. She didn't press. Sometimes peace doesn't come from closure, it comes from release. Later, I walked into town with an old sketchbook tucked under my arm. At the bookstore, I handed it to the owner for the local arts program. "Maybe someone else needs to see what dreams look like early," I said. Back home, the studio was full of warmth, River curled up by the fireplace, Amira talking business from the other room. I opened my journal and wrote, simply, "I'm proud of me." River looked up and showed me her sketch, a flame inside an open hand. "What do you think?" I smiled. "Keep going." The next morning, cinnamon and sugar filled the air. River had baked. You'll make someone a very lucky breakfast someday, I said, watching her hide a smile. While she cleaned up, I checked emails. Orders were steady, not explosive, just real. And that was enough. One message stood out. A local college inviting me to speak. I stared at it a while. Not because I was afraid, but because it meant something. I used to hear Margaret's voice in moments like that. Remember who you represent. But now I only had to represent myself. Later, we visited the winter market. River wore a scarf she'd helped design. We sipped cider, browsed crafts, laughed at a dog refusing to leave the heater. She pointed out a booth of student art. You should show them yours, I said. She hesitated, then said, maybe next time. That night, I climbed to the attic. I pulled out an old folder, finding a letter I had written at 22 during a night of doubt. It read, if you ever make it out, remember why you started. I folded it carefully, tucking it behind a framed quote that still guided me. Soft things can still spark wildfires. Downstairs, River was setting the table, humming. I didn't need the world to see who I was. I knew. And that was everything. A few days later, a letter arrived. No return address, but unmistakably hers. I watched your panel, Margaret wrote. I left early, not out of anger, but because I didn't recognize the woman on stage. And maybe that's what finally broke me. There were no apologies, no accusations, just an opening. Not forgiveness, but not bitterness either. I placed the letter in a box labeled Unsent Answers and slid it onto the top shelf. Outside, the last snow melted into the fields. River was out back, showing a younger girl how to stretch canvas. This was what legacy looked like. I wrapped a sweater around me and stepped outside. She waved, and for the first time in a long, long time, I waved back, whole. Sometimes, peace doesn't arrive with applause. It tiptoes in quietly, like the warmth of a child's smile across a cold room. I didn't win a battle against my mother. I simply chose a different kind of life, one that didn't need her permission. In this world, healing without apology takes courage, but it's possible. When we stop waiting for others to set us free, we learn the strength of becoming whole on our own. And maybe that's the softest, bravest revolution of all. If this story stirred something in you, maybe a memory, a hope, or an ache, I'd love to hear it. What legacy are you building in your quiet moments? I stopped waiting for her to say sorry, and that's when I finally felt free. Maybe you've had a moment like that too. A quiet decision, a private victory, no one clapped but your soul exhaled. If that moment found you, would you be willing to share it here? I'd love to know what helped you finally choose peace.